The United Nations Secretariat carries out the day-to-day work of the UN as mandated by the General Assembly and the organization's other main organs. The Secretary-General is the head of the Secretariat, which has tens of thousands of UN staff members working at duty stations all over the world. UN staff members are recruited internationally and locally, and work in duty stations and on peacekeeping missions. Serving the cause of peace in a violent world is a dangerous occupation. Since the founding of the United Nations, hundreds of brave men and women have given their lives in its service. The Secretariat is organized along departmental lines, with each department or office having a distinct area of action and responsibility. Offices and departments coordinate with each other to ensure cohesion in the UN's program of work. Much of the UN Secretariat is located in New York City, USA. The UN also has 3 major offices outside of its headquarters and 5 regional economic commissions. Secretariat, the organ that administers and coordinates the activities of the United Nations. It is headed by the UN Secretary-General. The Secretariat influences the work of the United Nations to a degree much greater than indicated in the UN Charter. This influence largely results from the fact that the Secretariat staff is composed of permanent expert officials, rather than political appointees of member nations. The staff is recruited on a merit basis, with regard to equitable geographic distribution, and its members are required to take an oath of loyalty to the United Nations and are not permitted to receive instructions from their home governments. The Secretariat's personnel in effect constitute an international civil service. Among them are translators, clerks, technicians, administrators, project directors, and negotiators. The Secretary-General is elected by the General Assembly, on the recommendation of the Security Council, for a renewable 5-year term. He must have the approval of all 5 permanent members of the Security Council to be selected to the post. Because of this, Secretaries-General have usually come from small, neutral countries. The Secretary-General is the chief administrative officer at all meetings of the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, and the Trusteeship Council, and he may carry out any functions that these organs entrust to him and his staff. He submits an annual report to the General Assembly on the work of the UN, and he may also bring to the Security Council's attention any matter that he deems a threat to international peace and security. The Secretary-General is the chief spokesman for the UN and is that body's most visible and authoritative figure in the arena of world affairs. He has his headquarters at the UN building in New York City. The United Nations Secretariat is one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations, UN. The Secretariat is the UN's executive arm. The Secretariat has an important role in setting the agenda for the deliberative and decision-making bodies of the UN, i.e., the General Assembly, Economic and Social Council, and Security Council, and the implementation of the decision of these bodies. The Secretary-General, who is appointed by the General Assembly, is the head of the Secretariat. The mandate of the Secretariat is a wide one. Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN's second Secretary-General, described its power as follows: the United Nations is what member nations made it, but within the limits set by government action and government cooperation, much depends on what the Secretariat makes it. It has creative capacity. It can introduce new ideas. It can, in proper forms, take initiatives. It can put before member governments findings which will influence their actions. The United Nations Department of Political Affairs, which has a role analogous to a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is a part of the Secretariat. So is the Department of Peace Operations. The Secretariat is the main source of economic and political analysis for the General Assembly and Security Council. It administers operations initiated by UN's deliberative organs, operates political missions, prepares assessments that precede peacekeeping operations, appoints the heads of peacekeeping operations, conducts surveys and research, communicates with non-state actors such as media and non-government organizations, and is responsible for publishing all of the treaties and international agreements. The UN Secretary-General's duties include helping resolve international disputes, administering peacekeeping operations, organizing international conferences, gathering information on the implementation of Security Council decisions, and consulting with member governments regarding various initiatives. Key Secretariat offices in this area include the Office of the Coordinator of Humanitarian Affairs and the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. The Secretary-General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter that, in his or her opinion, may threaten international peace and security. The current Secretary-General of the UN is Antonio Guterres. The Secretariat is divided into offices and departments. The hierarchy within each is as follows. Office, a minimum of 20 high-level professionals under the supervision of a D2 staff member, division head, or in few cases an assistant secretary-general or under-secretary-general. Division, a minimum of 15 high-level professionals under the supervision of a D2 staff member, division head. Service, a minimum of 8 high-level professionals under the supervision of a D1, general administrator, staff member. Section, a minimum of 4 professionals under the supervisions of a P4, 8 to 12 years experience, or a P5, 13 to 17 years experience, staff member. Unit, a minimum of 4 positions under the supervision of a chief. Offices. Executive Office of the Secretary-General, EOSG. United Nations Office of Internal Oversight Services, OIOS. United Nations Office of Legal Affairs, OLA. United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, ODA. United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR. Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, OCHR. United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNCHR. United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC. United Nations Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries and Small Island Developing States, ARLS. United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, UNOSA. United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, UNOCT. Departments. United Nations Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, DPPA. United Nations Department of Peace Operations, DPO. United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA. United Nations Department of Operational Support, DOS. United Nations Department of Management Strategy, Policy and Compliance, DMSPC, *. United Nations Department of General Assembly and Conference Management, DGACM. United Nations Department of Global Communications, DGC. United Nations Department of Safety and Security, DSS. Other offices. United Nations Office at Geneva, UNOG. United Nations Office at Nairobi, UNON. United Nations Office at Vienna, UNOV. UN Regional Commissions. Bangkok, Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Beirut, Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. Addis Ababa, Economic Commission for Africa. Geneva, Economic Commission for Europe. Santiago, Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. The Secretariat is a principal organ of the United Nations. Articles 7 to 8, 97 to 100, and 1 of the UN Charter primarily concern the Secretariat. Other articles of the Charter may also relate to the work of the Secretariat. The Secretary-General heads the Secretariat as the Chief Administrative Officer of the organization. The Secretary-General is appointed by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. The Secretariat provides service to the other principal organs and carries out the work mandated by them. The Secretariat is organized in departments and offices according to the changing needs of the organization. Over time, the structure and functions of the Secretariat have changed. Staff regulations are established by the General Assembly and promulgated by the Secretary-General. The staff regulations require the Secretary-General to provide and enforce staff rules, consistent with the staff regulations. The declaration made by staff, formerly the oath of office, is part of the staff regulations. Staffing. As at December 31, 2018, there are 37,505 people employed from more than 140 countries within the Secretariat. Eligibility for civil service is based on an unadministered examination offered worldwide, in addition to a competitive application process. Qualifications for membership include the highest standards of efficiency, competence, and integrity, according to the UN Charter. Staff members are appointed by the Secretary-General alone and are assigned to the organs of the UN. Staff members are appointed on a temporary or permanent basis, under the discretion of the Secretary-General. During staff recruitment, geographical variety is an especially prominent selection factor in order to accurately reflect the scope of member states present in the UN. The Charter states that staff members are responsible only to the organization and are prohibited from any action or influence that would suggest affiliation with a government or organization outside the UN. Headquartered in New York, the Secretariat functions through duty stations in Addis Ababa, Bangkok, Beirut, Geneva, Nairobi, Santiago, and Vienna, in addition to offices all over the world. One study finds the following factors play a role in the selection of staff for the Secretariat: a desire to achieve a minimum number of officials from each state, population size, and low assessment of dues. The most overrepresented states in the Secretariat are small, rich democracies. The Nordic states stand out, in particular, when it comes to overrepresentation. Status of women in the Secretariat. Representation of women in the UN, particularly at managerial and decision-making positions at the D1 level and above, has been a UN General Assembly concern and goal since 1970. Since 1984, the UN Secretariat, in order to achieve early gender equality, issued several 5-year action plans, including strategic plans, to improve the status of women in the Secretariat. These plans, however, did not have the desired impact, and progress in achieving gender parity remained slow. In December 1994, the UN General Assembly's disappointment that its gender equality target were not met urged the Secretary-General to prioritize the recruitment and promotion of women to reach to 50/50th representation in D1 and above posts by 2000. In February 2004, gender parity target for the Secretariat was once again revised to 2015. In 2009, despite the plans, and General Assembly resolutions, the representation of women in the UN Secretariat remained well below parity at 29.2%. The representation of women in the UN Secretariat, at the D1 level, in 2000, was 30.3%. Instead of increasing, in the next decade, the representation of women in the Secretariat decreased to 26.7%. In December 2011, the representation of women in the Secretariat at the D1 level was 27.4%, an increase of 0.6% over a 2-year period. At the current rate of progress, it is estimated that gender parity at the D1 to higher levels will not be achieved until after 102 years. At the D2 level, the representation of women in 2011 was 24.4%. To ensure that the gender equality target mandated by the General Assembly is met, the Secretariat, in September 1999, promulgated an administrative instruction, AI, on special measures for the achievement of gender equality, ST/AI/1999/9, Gender Equality A/I echoes the goals of, and is in conformity with, the mandate of Articles 8 and 101 of the Charter of the United Nations, and Article 4 Paragraph 1 of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. On September 4, 2012, in his annual reports to the General Assembly, titled Improvement of the Status of Women in the United Nations System, Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon stated that the aim of the special measures was to ensure gender balance in recruitment and promotion and that special measures would remain in effect until the goal of gender parity is achieved, and sustained for a period of time. The Secretary-General, in his recommendations to the General Assembly, noted that the United Nations Secretariat, pursuant to the decision of the Policy Committee chaired by the Secretary-General, is to ensure the effective implementation of special measures for gender equality. These measures include mandatory selection of equally or better qualified women candidates. Since its creation, the Secretariat has undergone extensive reforms. On March 21, 2005, Secretary-General Kofi Annan proposed several reforms for the Secretariat. He announced his intentions to appoint a scientific advisor, create a peace-building support office, establish a cabinet-style decision-making mechanism, and strengthen the mediation function. He also asked the General Assembly to appropriate funds for a one-time staff buyout, to work with him in revising budgetary and human resources rules, to grant the Secretary-General more managerial authority and flexibility, to strengthen the Office of Internal Oversight Services, and to review all mandates older than 5 years to see whether the activities concerned are still genuinely needed or whether the resources assigned to them can be reallocated in response to new and emerging challenges. Thank you for watching this video.